What if I told you that PlayStation 6 needs to launch in 2027, not 2028? Crazy, right? But hear me out. After digging into the details for over a year and a half, I'm almost certain that PS6 will drop in 2027, and the reason why might totally surprise you. According to Russian journalist Anton Logvinov, Sony reportedly showcased a prototype of the next-gen console to select industry partners, which could explain the larger-than-usual attendance at the event. While Sony has not confirmed or denied this, it has fueled speculation that the PlayStation 6 is further along in development than previously thought. Details are scarce, with no information on whether games were demonstrated on the hardware or if it was purely a technical briefing. Okay, I know what you're thinking. The PS5 Pro just came out. Why are we talking about PlayStation 6 already? Trust me, it's not about jumping the gun. This is all part of a bigger play, and it involves Xbox. According to some solid leaks, Microsoft is planning to launch their next-gen console in 2026. They're trying to pull off a power move, like back in the Xbox 360 days when they launched a year ahead of the PS3 and caught Sony off guard. Sony learned from that mistake, and they won't let it happen again. By pushing the PS6 out in 2027, it's all about timing, and in the cutthroat console wars, every year counts. This is where things get dicey. Pricing is always a gamble, and without solid specs, it's hard to pin down. Based on previous releases, it's hard to imagine the PS6 dropping for less than $500. But given the rising cost of cutting-edge tech and inflation, we might be looking at $600 or even $700. Considering the PS5 Pro is already priced at $699 without a disc drive or stand, that higher price tag doesn't seem too far-fetched. It could sting for early adopters, but if the console is packing some serious power and features, it might just be worth it. Let's talk about the guts of the PS6. CPU, a custom AMD Zen 5 chip with faster cores and more of them, designed to handle insanely complex game worlds at breakneck speeds. GPU, RDNA 4-based beast of a graphics card, pushing true 4K and some 8K upscaling methods, with ray tracing and path tracing. More on this later in the video. RAM, we're talking about GDDR6 or even 7 memory, at least 24 gigabytes, so you can load massive open-world games instantly and play with no hiccups. Earlier expectations were that AMD's RDNA 4 GPUs would also adopt the new memory type, but there are now indications that RDNA 4 will stick with GDDR6 memory. That's only a claim from a leaker, but there are also indications that AMD might be focusing on mainstream GPUs for its upcoming architecture. If that's correct, it wouldn't be too surprising to see a continued reliance on less expensive GDDR6 memory. It's likely we'll see a major SSD upgrade. After all, the PS5's SSD drastically cut down load times. And by 2027, we'll probably see a minimum of 2 terabyte storage, especially if there's a digital-only model. I think the 1 terabyte thing is over with this current gen. The leap from a Gen 4 SSD in the PS5 to a Gen 5 SSD for the PlayStation 6 feels like a natural progression. With how important load times have become, a Gen 5 SSD could push the boundaries even further, potentially eliminating wait times entirely. This would be huge for open-world games and complex, resource-intensive titles that thrive on fast data streaming. It is said that a weaker version of PSSR is on PS5 Pro, but the full power would only be unleashed on the PS6. If this turns out to be true, we could be looking at an incredible leap in gaming visuals. Based on the progression of past PlayStation console generations, we can make some educated guesses about how much more powerful the PlayStation 6 will be compared to the PS5. The PS4 was around 10 times more powerful than the PS3, particularly in terms of graphical processing and CPU performance. This leap allowed for higher resolutions, 720p to 1080p, improved texture quality, and faster load times. The PS5 marked another significant jump, around 2.5 times more powerful than the PS4 Pro and 10 times more powerful than the base PS4. The most notable upgrades were the switch to SSD storage, support for 4K gaming, ray tracing, and much faster data streaming. Given that each PlayStation generation brings massive improvements, we can assume the PS6 will aim for a leap of at least 2 to 4 times the power of the PS5 in key areas. With advancements in AMD's architecture and PlayStation's own innovations, like PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, the PS6 is likely to offer 2 to 3 times the graphical performance of the PS5. The PS5's Gen 4 SSD already drastically reduced load times. With a Gen 5 SSD in the PS6, we could see another 2 to 3 times speed increase in terms of data access and load speeds. This would translate into near instantaneous load times for large open-world games. Now the biggest question of them all, will the PS6 finally be able to play games with path tracing? Short answer? There is no short answer, but there is a chance. Here's why. Path tracing is indeed a step up from ray tracing in terms of visual realism, but it's also way more demanding on hardware. Instead of just simulating the primary paths of light, path tracing calculates the entire journey of many light rays as they bounce around a scene. This includes all the indirect lighting, which can involve multiple bounces off various surfaces, creating incredibly realistic global illumination. Why it's too demanding? The PS5 Pro, while powerful, is still fundamentally limited by its hardware. Path tracing requires not only a high number of calculations per frame, but also needs to handle a lot of data in real time. This means you need a tremendous amount of GPU power, a ton of fast memory, and an efficient cooling system to prevent overheating, all of which push the limits of what's feasible in a consumer console. Even on high-end gaming PCs, path tracing can bring systems to their knees unless you're using the latest and most powerful GPUs. Yes, the PlayStation 6 is likely to support path tracing. While the PS5 already introduced ray tracing, it's limited in terms of the complexity and accuracy it can handle. Cyberpunk 2077's overdrive mode, which pushes even the most powerful GPUs to their limits. By the time the PS6 releases, with next-gen AMD RDNA 4 or 5 chips, and possible enhancements like PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, it should have the horsepower to run path-traced games at reasonable frame rates. It will likely take advantage of advanced GPUs to handle the heavy computational load. Next-gen SSD technology, likely Gen 5, to keep data flowing fast. Path tracing might be selectively implemented in certain games, especially for indoor environments or specific game modes where the visual impact is most noticeable, rather than being used universally across all titles. Let's talk about the crazier speculations. One of the coolest rumored features is built-in wireless charging for accessories like controllers or even VR headsets. Imagine no longer having to deal with messy cables or charging docks. Just drop your controller onto the console, and it charges automatically. This would streamline the setup and add convenience, especially for people who are into VR or regularly use multiple accessories. Speaking of VR, we're expecting the PS6 to lean heavily into virtual reality. With PSVR 2 already a pretty impressive piece of tech, the PS6 might bring even tighter integration. Why it matters? Built-in support for VR could mean lower latency and higher resolutions, which would be a game changer for immersive experiences. Whether it's through new hardware or optimized software, the next generation of VR might be a core part of the PS6's appeal. Sony is purportedly keen on ensuring that the PS6 is backwards compatible with prior generations of PlayStation hardware, so it seems likely that the next-gen console will yet again sport an x86 architecture that can run PS5 and PS4 titles. However, the more pertinent question is whether Sony will finally crack the conundrum of PS3 backwards compatibility on the PS6. With PS1, PS2, and PSP emulators now available on PS5, the only missing piece of the puzzle is native emulation for PS3 games. Since there are hordes of great games still locked on the PS3, full backwards compatibility could be a huge selling point for the PS6. Meanwhile, a new update from Polish developer CD Projekt Red offers insight into the development timeline for The Witcher 4. While there isn't a definitive release date yet, based on previous game development cycles, we can speculate that The Witcher 4 will likely aim for a 2028 release. Regardless, it's clear that The Witcher 4 is being developed with next-gen capabilities in mind. Now, I've seen a lot of people saying, this is fake, this is bait, this is way too early. It's really not. I mean, every console manufacturer is on record saying that it takes 3 to 4 years to develop the next console after a new one comes out. And considering that the PS5 Pro is the latest version of the PS5, and they're working on a 2 to 3 year life cycle with that thing, it makes sense that by 2027 or 2028, we will see the PlayStation 6. Now, a couple of months ago, I was thinking that it would be 2028, but honestly, knowing that Xbox is releasing not only a next-gen console, but in addition to that, a handheld alongside it, and Sony has a very similar plan. I would assume that with this whole system they have now, where they have to do mid-gen refreshes that cost $700 and give you marginal performance bumps that do look really good on screen, especially after watching the Digital Foundry video.